we are ready now. Live stream? Okay, thank you. We're ready now for the defense opening statement. So let me invite Mr. Hutchinson. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Over the course of this trial, the circumstances that led to the tragic events of April and May 2023 will be very much in dispute. What is not in dispute is that Carlos Dominguez did the physical acts that caused the deaths of David Breaux, Kareem Abu Najm, and injured Kimberly Gilbert. The question to be answered in this trial is not one of who did it. Rather, the question that will be presented to you is what was Carlos Dominguez's specific intent and mental state when he did those physical acts? What was happening in his mind? And the evidence will show that it was a mind that had been devastated by a severe and debilitating mental disease. Mr. Dominguez has schizophrenia. Every psychologist and psychiatrist who has thoroughly examined him has reached that same conclusion, and none have found any evidence of malingering, which is a term used to describe exaggerating or faking mental health symptoms. As he sits before you today, he has been treated with antipsychotic medication for the past 21 months in a secure and controlled hospital or jail environment. But as the experts will tell you, medication is a treatment for the symptoms of schizophrenia. It is not a cure. And Mr. Dominguez continues to have a very serious mental illness to this day. Schizophrenia is a brain disorder that affects how a person thinks, feels, behaves, and perceives reality. It causes hallucinations, hearing, seeing, feeling things that aren't there, that have no basis in reality. These hallucinations can be fantastical and terrifying, and maybe things that a healthy person would never believe. But to someone with schizophrenia, they are a reality. Schizophrenia also causes delusions, which is a fixed false belief in something that has no basis in reality, as well as grossly disorganized speech, thoughts, and behavior.
Oh, thanks. Just a moment. Yeah, go ahead.
Hallucinations, delusions, grossly disorganized speech, thoughts, and behavior. The experts will tell you these are called the positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Not positive because they're good, but positive because they represent an addition to what is a normal, healthy experience. You will also hear about what are called the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, which represent an absence or a taking away from what a person once had. This includes minimal speech, diminished emotional expression, what is often described as a flat or blunted affect, an inability to maintain eye contact, concrete, simplistic thinking, avolition, which is a complete lack of motivation to do anything. You will hear how people with schizophrenia often have a very significant decline in personal hygiene and are unable to care for themselves and others. Anhedonia, which is an inability to experience pleasure. Slowing of movements, maintaining rigid, unusual postures for long periods of time, distrust of others, and social withdrawal. And over the course of this trial, you will see that Mr. Dominguez exhibit all of those symptoms, beginning sometime in the summer after his freshman year. Another hallmark of schizophrenia is the inability of people to recognize that they're sick, to recognize their symptoms. This is particularly common, the experts will tell you, when you have the first onset of schizophrenia, what experts will describe as the first break, before someone has had the opportunity to be placed on medication or treatment. Although it is obvious to everyone around them that they are ill, people with schizophrenia don't recognize that. And because of it, it is common for them to deny all symptoms of mental illness and deny any mental illness whatsoever. Schizophrenia is a disease that attacks the young. For men, the onset is typically sometime in the late teens or early 20s. Mr. Reales Dominguez is 22 years old. He was born on October 5th, 2002. Although it is impossible to identify the exact time that he first began exhibiting symptoms, as I mentioned, the evidence will show that it probably occurred sometime near the end of his freshman year at UC Davis in the spring of 2021 or shortly thereafter. Prior to that, for the first 18 and a half years of his life, Mr. Reales Dominguez was completely healthy. Born in El Salvador, he immigrated to the United States as a very young child. He was raised in Oakland with his parents and his two siblings, Dylan and Mia, who are 4.5 and 9 years younger than him. You will see that he was extremely close with his siblings. Given the hours that his parents worked, it was Mr. Reales Dominguez who often had the responsibility of getting them to school, walking them home, and giving them food. Although he spoke only Spanish when he first began school, he quickly learned English and would ultimately excel academically. At Castlemont High School in Oakland, he was an honor student, a four-sport athlete, participating in varsity football, soccer, track and swimming. Although not big in stature, he had a muscular, athletic build, and through hard work, he became the starting safety and captain of the football team. And through his hard work in the classroom, he would ultimately graduate 11th out of his graduating class. He was also a typical teenager. He started a YouTube channel which consisted of him doing silly activities or pranks with his friends and siblings, and also playing video games with running commentary. He was friendly, he was outgoing, and he was healthy. And through his hard work, he earned admission to UC Davis, which he began in the fall of 2020. Now, this was a time of COVID and online learning, and it was difficult to begin college in these circumstances, and Mr. Reales Dominguez was more shy than he had been in high school. Growing up, he had been referred to as Carlos Reales, which is the paternal name of his father. And Davis, they started referring to him as Carlos Dominguez because that is the last name on the Zoom screen. During this trial, he will be referred to as both, but I will refer to him as Mr. Reales Dominguez because that is the name his parents gave him. Despite the challenges of COVID, Mr. Reales Dominguez, during his freshman year, developed multiple friendships across different social circles. The first person he met who became a good friend was a man by the name of Nathan Riegos de Dios. They met over a Zoom class. Mr. Riego de Dios is a former football player himself, and he invited Mr. Reales Dominguez to throw the football around. And over the course of their freshman year, they would become very close friends. Through Nathan, Mr. Reales Dominguez met a young woman by the name of Kaylee Gallardo, who by the middle of his freshman year would become his girlfriend, and is probably the person at UC Davis who knew him better than anyone else. Also during his freshman year, he became friends with a group of older UC Davis students from a different social circle, Sydney Slezlicki, Mark Capito, Philip Hahn, and Christian Ortega. And they ultimately invited Mr. Dominguez to join their fraternity. Witnesses will describe a young man, although somewhat on the shy side, was friendly, enjoyed social activities, liked being around people who they would see laugh, joke around, and smile. Throughout his freshman year, he had a close-cut, fade haircut, what Kaylee Gallardo described as pristine hygiene. He had a build that was described as normal, athletic, muscular, and even got a little chubby during COVID. A former athlete, he enjoyed playing basketball and other pickup games, and all the people who played with him during his freshman year did not notice anything unusual about how the way he walked, how he stood, or how he carried himself. Like many students entering UC Davis as a biosciences major, he found the academic work far more challenging than he expected, but he struggled through it, and he finished his freshman year in good academic standing with 3 Bs, 5 Cs, 1 D, and a calculus for neuroscience, a class that he and many other freshmen had to repeat. Even in the time of COVID, it was a typical freshman experience. And then Carlos Dominguez got sick. There is not a known cause for schizophrenia. They believe genetics plays a large role, but the experts will tell you it is a combination of genetics, brain chemistry, and environmental factors. And like so many individuals who experienced that first break of schizophrenia, Mr. Dominguez was unable to recognize that he was sick. He was unable to recognize the symptoms that were clear to everyone else. When he left Davis for summer break, he went to Tracy, California, where his parents and siblings had recently moved. And his sister Mia recalls seeing him several times a day, just staring blankly at a wall for long periods of time. And she saw this multiple times throughout the summer. But at such a young age, she didn't know what to think about it and didn't think to tell her parents. But she did notice that he had stopped showering, which seemed very unusual to her, knowing the teenage brother who had showered multiple times a day in high school. When he returned to Davis for the fall of his sophomore year, he moved into the Parkside apartments with Nathan Riegos de Dios and 2 other roommates. But it became clear to Nathan very quickly that something had changed in his good friend. Suddenly, the athletic build had changed to someone who, quote, got really skinny. And Mr. Riegos de Dios will describe how over the course of that year, he would see Mr. Dominguez moving his lips, like having a conversation with someone, but nothing was being said. And Nathan will tell you this freaked him out. And over the course of the year, which they began as good friends, they ultimately stopped communicating at all. Most of the time he spent his sophomore year was with his girlfriend, Kaylee Gallardo. But she also will tell you the differences she saw between the young man she met her freshman year. She also noted the dramatic weight loss and the pristine hygiene that she had dealt with for the first year, when he had to go back and take a shower before they could do anything, was gone. And she noticed, in addition to this decline in hygiene, he became withdrawn. He didn't want to go out and do anything. He preferred to just stay in his apartment room, making beats with music or writing songs. When they did go out, he was paranoid. She will tell you how on multiple occasions, when they are walking down the streets of Davis or in some other public area, Mr. Dominguez would believe that people had just said something about him. And these were people who Miss Gallardo knew were clearly engaged in their own conversations or hadn't said a word. And she could not even give you an estimate of how often this happened. She initially said 10 to 15 times, but it was so frequent, she can't even put a number on it. And this obviously concerned her, but when she would try to speak to Mr. Dominguez about it, he just shrugged it off. She'll tell you about an incident in around March and April of 2022 when they were entering her apartments at the Parkside Apartments on Olive Drive in Davis. And they were going through the door, and another couple was coming behind them. And when nothing was said, Mr. Dominguez suddenly turned around and got in the man's face and confronted him about what he had just said. And the man hadn't said a word. Ms. Gallardo, it was clear to her that Mr. Dominguez felt threatened by this man. He even attempted to tackle him to the ground. And Ms. Gallardo had to separate them. Unable to calm him down, she then tried to drive him back to his apartment complex, only to have him consistently try to open the door and get out while the car was still moving. Finally, when she was able to come to a complete stop, he got out and walked off into the darkness. And then for the remainder of the night, when she tried to call him and tried to text him, he did not respond. And she was so worried that the worst had happened. And then the next morning, she was able to get in contact with him, and he shrugged it off and didn't want to talk about it. And for Miss Gallardo, this event was a sign that as much as she cared for Mr. Dominguez, as much as she wanted to help him, she needed to end the relationship, which she did sometime in March or April of 2022. Although they would still see each other occasionally as friends, the relationship never resumed, although it was clear Mr. Dominguez wanted it to. Now, after Ms. Gallardo ended their relationship, Mr. Dominguez's mental illness continued to progress. In late summer, he was able to get a job at the Jack in the Box on G Street in Davis. But it didn't last long. You will hear from a coworker named Gladys Verdeen. She will tell you on her first day on the job where she was reporting, Mr. Dominguez just stood behind the counter and didn't even acknowledge her for 10, 15 minutes, till finally someone came out and spoke to her. She will tell, now they had overlapping shifts. Mr. Dominguez worked earlier than her, but they would have about 2 or 3 hours they would overlap, and she would describe how every shift they would see him standing like a statue, arms straight by his side, staring at a wall for 10, 20 minutes. And this happened multiple times an hour, every shift she had. She will tell you about one incident where Mr. Dominguez, attempting to work the drive-thru, stood motionless like a statue, staring at a wall, while the beeping of the drive-thru order was heard throughout the restaurant. She'll tell you how she called out his name multiple times with no response. Finally, she walked over, pulled the headset from his head, and in her words, he flinched really bad, got scared, and fled to the back of the restaurant. Ms. Verdeen will tell you how sometimes he just stopped, he didn't show up for his shifts, and ultimately he stopped showing up altogether. Now in the fall of 2022, Mr. Reales Dominguez moved into a house located at 762 Hawthorne Lane in Davis, where he was housemates with Mark Capito, Philip Hahn, and Christian Ortega. He actually took over well, he wasn't on the lease, he took over the room that had been previously occupied by Sidney Slazicki, who had moved back home in Sacramento County due to family issues, but would still visit the house frequently. And when he moved in, it was immediately clear to all the housemates that this was very different than the young man they had met freshman year. Extremely thin, with long hair that hung in his eyes. He wasn't showering regularly, if he showered at all. He walked with a stiff gait, arms straight at his side, which some of them would describe like almost a zombie. He isolated himself in his room, and when he would leave the room, he wouldn't even acknowledge him. Maybe 10% of the time. During housemate meetings, they would describe how he would stare off into a space or stare off into a wall, and they would have to say his name multiple times to get his attention. All three roommates saw or heard things that caused them to believe that Mr. Reales Dominguez was hearing voices. Mark Capito actually remembered an incident early in his friendship with Mr. Reales Dominguez, where Mr. Reales Dominguez asked Mr. Capito if he had ever heard voices, which Mr. Capito recognized in retrospect was likely a request for help, although Mr. Capito didn't realize that at that time. Now, sometime after moving into the Hawthorne Lane residence, Mr. Reales Dominguez began to engage in a very unusual routines when he would leave his home at night, or leave his home most often at night, and he would walk or ride a bike to a small number of seemingly random locations where he would sit and stare or engage in other seemingly bizarre behavior. Now, one of these locations was Sycamore Park. Before moving into the Hawthorne Lane residence, he had been to Sycamore Park on a few occasions. He had played basketball at the elementary next door with Nathan, but it didn't have any meaningful connection. But within a few months, he was going there regularly, where he would sit on or near the play structure and stare at the ground or stare off into the distance. On one of his walks, he found a knife blade without a handle, and he started engaging in a routine where he would take the blade and just try to throw it into the ground, trying to get it to stick, or throw it into a specific tree, trying to get it to stick. And he would do this over and over. And when he realized that the dullness of the blade was making this routine difficult, he did go on Amazon and he ordered a knife, which you've already heard was ordered on December 5th, 2022. Another seemingly random location that Mr. Reales Dominguez would regularly go to, although less so than Sycamore Park, was an area along the railroad tracks at the intersection of 2nd, or what the gravel portion of 2nd and K Streets. This was the location of a downed and abandoned wooden power pole, which I will refer to as Mr. Reales Dominguez's sitting log. Now, during her sophomore year and into the fall of her junior year, which was in the fall of 2022, Kaylee Gallardo lived at the Ryder Apartments, which are right there. For point of reference, over here is the intersection of 2nd and L Street, which was near the area where Miss Guillory was stabbed. Now, when Mr. Reales Dominguez was living at the Parkside Apartments, he would follow the rail when he would go to visit Miss Gallardo at the Ryder Apartments. He would follow the railroad tracks that run north and south through Davis, and you see they split at 3rd Street. He would follow it east into, which is a gravel portion of 2nd Street. And although you're not supposed to do this, he would cut across the railroad tracks, and then he would enter the Ryder Apartments through a gate. There is a locked gate. It has signs that say no trespassing, but you will see it's wide open, and people commonly pass through there. And somehow, during this time, he became aware of the down power pole that I would call the sitting log. It's not there anymore. It was finally removed, but fortunately, Davis police officers named Alex Torres, who, when taking photographs at the scene where Miss Guillory was stabbed, he took hundreds of photos, not knowing what is relevant. And he got 4 photos where you can see the log. It's not clear. There is a gravel pile there. You see an overturned chair, but behind it you can see the pole. And even after Kelly Gallardo moved out of the Ryder Apartments, Mr. Reales Dominguez would find himself either walking or riding to this location, sitting on that log and staring off across the railroad tracks toward the Ryder Apartments. This photo doesn't have the log in anymore, but you can still see the gravel, and you can see the Ryder Apartments directly across. And he would come here at night, sometimes in the day, and he would sit and stare. Sometimes he would get up and walk around before coming back. Now, you've heard about Central Park. Unlike Sycamore Park and his sitting log, Central Park was not one of his destinations when he would leave on these walks. He was familiar with Central Park. He had attended farmers markets there, just like most people in Davis. But when he would leave to go on these walks, it wasn't a destination. It was, however, a place he would stop on his way back home, whether from the sitting log or some other location. Now, when Mr. Reales Dominguez ordered that knife on December 5th, it was right during the time of finals and then Christmas break. We don't know when it arrived, but we know he went home to Tracy over winter's break. And his parents were so shocked and concerned at the physical decline they saw in their son that they urged him to stay home and not go back to UC Davis. They could see something was terribly wrong, but they did not have the knowledge to recognize what it was, and as immigrants themselves, they did not know how to access the resources to help him. And because Mr. Reales Dominguez was an adult and did not rely on his parents for financial assistance to attend college, they did not even have the financial leverage to keep him to stay home. By the time Mr. Reales Dominguez returned to Davis for his winter term, he had stopped communicating with his housemates altogether. He wouldn't acknowledge their presence. He had only minimal communication with his family, and then it cut off altogether. Ms. Gallardo will tell you about how on February 6th, she received text messages from both Dylan and Mia, concerned that they hadn't heard from their brother, and if she could help them get in touch with him. And for Ms. Gallardo, who knew how close Mr. Dominguez was with his siblings, this terrified her. But ultimately, she was able to give them a number, and they were able to contact him. He continued to isolate himself in his room. He would only leave to attend class or go on his nightly walks. And as I mentioned, when he did appear, he walked stiff and erect, arms straight at his side. He continued going on his nightly walks. He started carrying the knife he purchased on Amazon, both to Sycamore Park and the sit-in log, and he would continue the bizarre routine of trying to throw it into the ground, trying to get it to stick, or throwing it at a specific tree. You also see that he used the knife to carve into one of the trees at Sycamore Park what he thought was a face, or something that looked like a face to him. He tried to attend his classes, but his disease made that impossible for him to comprehend the material or perform the work. And you will hear he received all F's his winter term. By April of 2023, Mr. Dominguez was in a state that multiple experts will tell you is florid psychosis, where he was seeing, hearing, and believing that he was being stalked by a group of shape-shifting supernatural beings that he described as the shadow figures. He had these hallucinations for some time, but as his disease progressed, they became more frequent, more vivid, and more terrifying. And you will see it was the progression of this disease and the hallucinations that came with it that ultimately led to the tragic encounters with David Breaux, Kareem Abu Najm, and Kimberly Guillory. When Mr. Dominguez was first stopped by the police on April 3rd, you will hear he was at Sycamore Park, sitting on the bench, staring off into space. The individual who followed him and called the police will describe how he seemed to walk not in any sort of deceptive way, but as though he had no idea where he was going. It was simply random. When he was contacted by the police, he was paranoid. He was in a state of florid psychosis. And you will see he did not believe in his mind that he had stabbed or killed anyone. After he was taken to the Davis Police Department, he was placed in an interrogation room where he would remain for the next 7 hours, not moving, not eating, not drinking, not asking to use the bathroom. Detectives Steve Ramos and Matt Muscardini would spend approximately 5.5 of that hours asking Mr. Dominguez leading, forced choice questions to which they would receive contradictory responses of yeah, no, or I don't know. When they did not get the responses they wanted, they became frustrated, they became angry, and they repeatedly told Mr. Dominguez what they, quote, already know. That he stabbed people, that he killed people, and they told this to him over and over and over again. During this 7 hours in the interrogation room, Mr. Dominguez sat motionless, speaking in a halting, monotone voice. When officers moved about their chair like normal people do, Mr. Dominguez sat like a statue. Even during a break, when both officers left the room, the only movement was Mr. Dominguez standing up, putting on his hoodie, and starting to walk out the door before the officer watching the door stopped him and said, "What are you doing? Sit down." Mr. Dominguez said, "I was just going to go for a walk." Completely oblivious to the situation he was in. He didn't make eye contact, except for the times the officers ordered him to look at them, which they did over 20 times. He exhibited grossly disorganized thought processes and disorganized speech. Although he persisted in giving the name of John Joas, he gave his correct phone number, and he tried to give his email to UC Davis under the name Carlos Dominguez, but he was unable to spell it correctly. Other information he gave was close to accurate. You heard at the scene he said he lived at 782 Hawthorne, when in reality he lived at 762. He spelled his mother's name as Varla instead of Carla. He spelled his high school as Castlement instead of Castlemont. And what experts will tell you, this is not examples of lying, it is examples of a completely disorganized mind. And for the experts who watched that interrogation, it is obvious and clear it is a person who is exhibiting multiple symptoms of schizophrenia. But it was being conducted by two detectives who had absolutely no knowledge, no training, and no experience to recognize what they were seeing. Now, you heard that Mr. Dominguez was separated from UC Davis. He had the appeal, which was mentioned, that was for academic probation. When he received his separation letter, they simply sent him an email, which he never responded to and never acknowledged that he received it, which there is no evidence he ever received it. And you'll see it is an email written in a way that even a mentally healthy person would have difficulty understanding what it meant. You saw from the prosecutor's PowerPoint that even after this first two stabbings had occurred on May 1st, he appears to be trying to go to his classes at their scheduled time. You will see he arrived at one almost right as it ended, but then appeared to go to the other one. And then the following day, May 2nd, after the stabbing of Miss Guillory, again you see him trying to go to his classes. And you will see, with respect to this power on, power off summary that the prosecutor showed you, you will see that Mr. Dominguez had an old cell phone that didn't hold a charge, and this power on, power off pattern existed for multiple months. And there was a very good reason why someone would need to bring a cell phone to a class at UC Davis, and that will be explained to you. You will see also after his arrest, when the officers told him that he had been separated from UC Davis, he maintained that he had not, that he was still a student. After his arrest, Mr. Dominguez was housed in an infirmary of the Yolo County Jail. He spent each day in an empty cell, dressed in a suicide smock, staring at the wall or staring at the ground. He never expressed any desire to hurt himself. He was in the suicide smock just because of how he presented to the mental health staff. He consumed only an extremely small amounts of food and water. They described it as a hunger strike, but he wasn't asking for anything. He just said he wasn't hungry. And soon, the former starting high school safety had fallen to about 108 pounds, resulting in multiple trips to the emergency rooms. But like so many with schizophrenia, he denied any mental health symptoms. Every question asked of him, he denied. And when they offered to give him antipsychotic medication, he refused. For nearly 3 months, he sat in that cell without showering, without brushing his teeth, staring at a wall or staring at the ground. For the first month, he was minimally communicative. You heard he made statements concerned that he was missing his classes at UC Davis, that he needed to register for classes, and he was wondering if he could have a laptop so he could keep up with his classes, still believing he was a student. Ultimately, he stopped communicating verbally, would only use hand gestures, and then basically stopped communicating at all. The psychiatrist who was treating him at the jail, her name is Patricia Tyler, and she treated him via telepsychiatry. She didn't actually meet him in person. She diagnosed him as suffering from schizophrenia, and she recommended emergency involuntary medication. Medication he would have to take whether he wanted to or not. You will see that finally in late July, he was given a single dose of antipsychotic medication, and finally the jail sought and received an order on August 3rd, 2023, an order from the court that allowed them to administer antipsychotic medication involuntarily. And shortly thereafter, Mr. Dominguez began receiving antipsychotic medication for the first time in his life. Once the order was signed and they showed it to him, he didn't physically resist. You will hear that the criminal case was paused on September 13th, 2023. He was admitted to Atascadero State Hospital for treatment. He remained at Atascadero for approximately 3.5 months before returning to Yolo County Jail in January of 2024, when criminal proceedings resumed. You will see that while antipsychotic medication is very effective, or can be very effective, at treating the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, the hallucinations, the delusions, it is far less effective at treating the negative symptoms. And you will see that many of Mr. Dominguez's negative symptoms, though less pronounced, are still present today. But having now received treatment, received medication, he does now recognize and fully accept that he has schizophrenia. Now, I would like to respond to a few things that was brought up by the prosecutor, because it'll likely be several weeks, if not more, before the defense is allowed to call any witnesses. And they spoke to you about what Dr. Matt Massey saw. He was the individual who found Mr. Dominguez in Central Park at the in Sycamore Park, at the location of the stabbing of Kareem Abu Najm. And what Dr. Massey will tell you is that when he approached and he had a flashlight on his cell phone, Mr. Dominguez seemed scared. He said, "What do you want? Leave me alone." And he spoke in a childlike voice. And that Dr. Massey's initial reaction when Mr. Dominguez got on the bike and rode off was that he had scared him. And then he saw Mr. Abu Najm on the ground. What you will see is that although Mr. Dominguez did ride across the highway and drop that bike, he immediately returned back and crossed over that bridge a young woman named Hannah Cheney, who was riding her bicycle by when she saw Dr. Massey on the phone before police even arrived, saw someone who you will see was Carlos Dominguez crossing back over. In the state he was at that time, he was just trying to go home. And that is the only way he knew. Another thing the prosecutor said is that there was no blood found at the Hawthorne residence. You will see that statement is absolutely not true. To the contrary, the evidence found at the Hawthorne residence will show that Carlos Dominguez made no effort to clean or wash anything. Another thing I want to mention is that you will hear testimony from Kimberly Guillory and other members of the unhoused community in Davis, and they are very close, some of them are very close to each other, and they speak amongst each other. And you will see they are operating under a belief that approximately 9 o'clock on May 1st, when Kimberly Guillory was stabbed, that Mr. Dominguez was across from the tents, hiding behind trees, scoping them out. This is what they told the law enforcement. This is what many of them still believe. And that two men named Isaac Cheeseman and Albert Osorio did chase him. What you will see is that is absolutely not true. There was a person who they chased at 9 o'clock. His name was Khalid Siddiqui. He worked at Steve's Pizza. And when he would later talk to police, he would tell them how he was trying to walk home from work. And he got to that area, and suddenly a group of unhoused individuals started chasing him for no apparent reason. And an officer named Derek Russell, through an anonymous source at the FBI, was able to get a video of this incident, which clearly identified it was Mr. Siddiqui. But for some reasons, he did not get a copy of the video. And Davis police ultimately determined that Mr. Siddiqui had no involvement whatsoever, and who those individuals saw was Mr. Siddiqui, not Mr. Dominguez. But you will see to this day, law enforcement has allowed those witnesses to continue to repeat that false statement, even though they know it is not true. You heard just last week, Ms. Guillory was meeting with law enforcement about her testimony. She repeated that statement, and they let her continue to believe it. And keep that in mind when you evaluate the testimony of Ms. Guillory and the other members of the unhoused community, how that false belief affects their testimony. Now, an opening statement is not an opportunity to discuss the law, and it will be many weeks before the judge instructs you on the specific intents and mental states that the prosecution must prove for the charges in this case and the various enhancements. So please, as Judge McAdam told you, reserve your judgment until you have heard all the evidence and have had all the law explained to you so you can see how it fits together. But as you hear the evidence, much of which is going to be very difficult to hear and very difficult to see, please keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, that this trial is not just about the physical acts that Mr. Dominguez did, but also what was happening in his mind when he did them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. That concludes the defense opening statement, and that concludes the opening statement phase of this trial. So the next turn will be the evidentiary phase of the trial, and we'll begin to take witnesses produced by the people. We're right here up against the noon break, so we're going to go ahead and take our break. This afternoon, you'll be hearing from witnesses. Okay, and then I had a question from juror number 7. We're all good where we're at. Thank you for your disclosure. It's not a concern to me. Okay? Thank you. And then I had a question also from another juror about judging credibility. And I recognize that each of you have a little bit different angle and so forth. The witness stand is right here, and you're to use your best ability to see the witness, and I'll make sure you can hear each and every witness, okay? And so we'll do that. So at this time, we're going to resume at 1:30. I'd like you to be up here a little bit before. Please wear your badges in the courthouse. And remember the 3-part admonition at all times. Do not discuss this case other than scheduling. Do not research the case. And do not form any opinions until you're deliberating. Enjoy your break, and I'll see you back this afternoon. Thank you, folks.